The following account is true, or at least it's based on the best sources currently available to us. And yet, for all the care taken, there are certain details we are unable to confirm. Others we have chosen to omit, and still others which have been lost to time. These things cannot be found in any book or archive, and so we can do no better than repeat them as local lore. As such, you should take what you hear with a grain of salt, because truth is a slippery thing, especially when it comes to tales as fantastical as this one. The year was 1820, and the Blue Ridge Mountains of Bedford County, Virginia, held a quiet, humid stillness that descended upon the valley like a damp cotton shroud broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant, lonely creak of a wagon wheel on the dusty road that led to Lynchburg, a sound that always seemed to carry the promise of forgotten travelers and unexpected news. It was into this deep rural silence that a man named Thomas J. Beale first wrote his presence at the small, unassuming hostelry run by the patient, Robert Morris's being the initial ripple that would eventually become a powerful, frustrating wave of obsession and historical mystery. Beale was a man defined by his anonymity, quiet, clean-shaven, and utterly unremarkable, save for the fact that he arrived not with crates of trade goods or livestock, but with a stout, reinforced iron box that he guarded with a meticulous and unsettling vigilance. A small, heavy trunk that hinted at contents far more valuable than the gold dust. On banknotes, usually carried by men traveling through this lonely stretch of the Commonwealth. Beale spoke little of his travels, mentioning only a vast expedition westward into the territories of Colorado and New Mexico, where, he claimed, he and a company of 30 adventurous souls had discovered a spectacular mineral strike in the ancient, unmapped mountains, a discovery so profound in its richness that it required the utmost secrecy and years of careful, silent accumulation, resulting in the astonishing fortune now sealed within the heavy, dark iron casing. As the days passed and Beale became a regular fixture in the tavern, nursing the same drink and eating the same food and never speaking of anything beyond the weather and his vague, unspecified business dealings, a few brave souls dared to ask about the box, its weight, its purpose, its origins. But Beale was never forthcoming, deflecting any question with polite vagueness or simple avoidance, until at last, having stayed as long as he felt necessary, he announced his intention to depart, asking only for a sturdy horse to help him over the mountain passes and deliver his precious cargo safely to the eager hands of one. Thomas' nationality, at a future date to be determined. Though he had arrived alone when he left, he was accompanied by 2 men who had volunteered for the dangerous journey, one of whom was Thomas' nationality himself, a young man of great promise from a prominent Lynchburg family, who had grown restless with life in the sleepy town, and was said to be searching for adventure, preferably of the lucrative variety. Together, the trio set out toward the west, carrying with them into the sunrise the beginnings of an epic tale. Upon their departure, Maurice took pains to ensure the adventurers were well fed and cared for, seeing to it personally that they had the strongest horse and supplies to last their journey. For his trouble, he was rewarded with a small, leather-bound book filled with what appeared to be indecipherable scribblings and diagrams, which Beale insisted must be kept secret and delivered to Nathaniel at some point after his own death. With the mysterious book in his possession, Maurice was able to piece together a few more details of Beale's journey and the nature of his strange, secretive enterprise. For starters, while the name of the 3rd member of the party remains unknown, we do know from Morris's notes that he was an expert tracker and woodsman, indispensable to the mission's success, and therefore someone Beale clearly trusted implicitly. We also know that the party intended to travel north from Lynchburg, 10 due west, following a route only charted by Native Americans. Until that point, this journey would take them through lands rich in natural beauty but hostile to human habitation, across rivers not yet spanned by bridge and over mountains whose peaks had yet to be named. Yet despite these daunting obstacles, the men pressed on, guided by the promise of untold wealth and driven by a need for speed born of both excitement and fear. The exact cause of their haste is unclear, but it may have had something to do with a band of Iva pirates known to lurk along the waterways, preying on travelers and their possessions. Not to mention a growing unrest among the western tribes who saw the increasing numbers of explorers and settlers with an ever-deepening suspicion. Whatever the reason, Beale pushed on with grim determination, eventually reaching the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. It was here that the difficulties of the journey truly began. The terrain grew rough and unforgiving, the climate cold and wet, And with each passing day, the men had to contend with dwindling supplies and the growing certainty that their pursuers were close behind. Through it all, Beale remained resolute, insisting they press on, go forward, and hope for the best. And then, almost as quickly as it began, the hard journey was over. And the three men emerged from the mountains onto the high plains of what is today southwestern Colorado, where spread before them a sight of such staggering magnificence that they stood transfixed, unable to speak or move for hours. Before them lay a vast, flat expanse of land dotted with hills and canyons, and cut through by winding rivers. In the distance rose tall, proud mountains capped with snow, their peaks piercing the clouds, and everywhere were signs of great mineral wealth. Glittering veins of gold and silver running through the hillsides and sparkling nuggets scattered across the plains. In this place of stunning natural beauty, the men made camp and prepared to explore, eager to see what other wonders they might find. Yet they had barely begun their search when they were forced to flee, pursued by a force that could neither see nor understand, one that drove them back to the safety of their camp and filled their hearts with terror. To this day, nobody knows exactly what it was that drove the men from their newfound paradise, though some believe it was the spirits of the land, angered by the intrusion and determined to drive them away. Others claim it was nothing more than a band of wild animals, driven mad by some unknown sickness. Whatever the cause, the effect was the same. The men were forced to abandon their claim and flee for their lives, racing back the way they came, pursued by whatever horrors lay hidden in the hills. According to Maurice's notes, the men traveled day and night, surviving on what little food and water they could carry and haunted by the sounds of pursuit echoing through the canyons. At last, when their strength was spent and their hope nearly gone, they reached the safety of the forest and made their way to a nearby river, where they stole a boat and fled downstream. From there, they made their way to St. Louis, where they finally felt safe from pursuit and began to piece together their shattered lives. Yet even in this moment of supposed triumph, tragedy struck. The quiet, unassuming Mr. Beale fell ill and died within weeks, leaving Nathaniel and the woodsman to divide his possessions and carry on alone. What exactly happened next is not known for certain, but we do know that the two survivors made several trips back to the area, hoping to reclaim Beale's lost fortune. They scoured the hills, searched the caves, and followed every lead, but to no avail. They never found what they were looking for, and so they packed up their meager belongings and headed east, bound for Virginia and the delivery of Maurice's mysterious book. Once they arrived, the two men split ways, with the woodsman disappearing into the wilderness, and Nathaniel delivering the book to his grateful host and disappearing into Lynchburg. There he lived out the remainder of his days, never mentioning his incredible adventures. To anyone, though, locals did catch rumors of a large purchase of land in the area and a sudden unexplained increase in wealth for several prominent citizens. For his part, Maurice's remained at the tavern, tending to his guests and guarding Beale's legacy, which in the end proved to be his undoing. One evening, a group of armed men entered the tavern and demanded the book, threatening violence if it was not handed over immediately. Maurice refused, knowing full well the danger he was courting, and a struggle ensued in which he was shot and killed. The men fled with the book, but were never seen again. To this day, nobody knows what happened to them, or to the fabled treasure they sought. But the story does not end here, for soon after Maurice's death, a new tavern was built on the very same spot, and in the years since, several others have come and gone. Each has borne witness to the whispers of the past, the echoes of men driven mad by the very land itself, and each has added their own stories to the growing tapestry of local legend. Perhaps the most compelling of these tales belongs to a man known only as Old Tom, who is said to have stumbled upon the lost campsite of Beale's party while hunting one crisp autumn morning in the early 1800s. Upon discovering the site, Tom noticed several peculiar markings on a nearby boulder, which he believed to be a type of cipher. He took a piece of charcoal and attempted to copy them down, but as he did so, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw a tall, gaunt figure, cloaked in shadow and holding a silver pistol. Startled, Tom dropped the charcoal, which scattered in the wind, and the cloaked man raised his weapon. "Don't move," he rasped, in a voice like gravel. "You have seen too much." Then without another word, he fired and fled. Tom survived the gunshot, but he never recovered from the shock. spending his remaining days babbling incoherently about the figure in black and the secrets of the mountain. Such stories have endured for centuries, passed down from one generation of locals to the next, each retelling adding a new layer of detail or a fresh perspective on an old mystery. Some dismiss them as the ramblings of superstitious hicks, while others believe there may be something more to them. After all, there are still many parts of the country unexplored and many secrets yet to be uncovered. Who's to say what may be lurking in the shadows? For the next few moments, let us indulge ourselves in the year 1822. Specifically, let us transport ourselves to the town of Richmond, Virginia. More precisely, to a humble tavern situated at its heart. Imagine, if you will, the robust scent of roasted meats mingling with the rich aroma of freshly brewed beer, creating a heady brew that enticed weary travelers and locals alike. The Golden Fleece Tavern, much like any other establishment of its ilk, buzzed with activity. Yet there was one patron who stood out from the rest, a man named Thomas J. Beale, who had become a regular at the inn. Beale was not your ordinary customer. He carried himself with an air of quiet dignity and purpose, his demeanor as unreadable as the weathered leather suitcase that never left his side. For weeks, he'd occupied a corner room at the inn, paying his lodging fees in an endless stream of small, crisp bills. His days were spent in quiet, lengthy correspondence, and he always had that same worn leather suitcase resting on the bed beside him, never leaving it out of sight. While some patrons whispered about the mysterious suitcase, Robert Morris, the innkeeper, remained unfazed. A man known for his calm, observant nature and his unflappable silence. He recognized the deep-seated apprehension in his guest's eyes, an anxious tension that spoke not of immediate danger, but of the immense, crushing weight of responsibility that came with guarding such wealth. As the summer heat gave way to the crisp, clear air of a Virginian autumn, Beale finally announced that he must depart, stating vaguely that business called him back to the western plains. And it was here, as the first colorful leaves began to drift down from the trees and the nights grew cooler, that the true tale began to unfold. One evening, after the tavern had closed for the night and the last embers glowed in the hearth, Beale approached Maurice with a proposition that would test the mettle of any man, let alone a simple innkeeper. He explained that he could no longer keep the heavy burden of his valuables with him, and so he placed a large, dense iron container in Maurice's hands, along with two smaller, intricately locked brass containers. In that moment, the innkeeper felt the weight of history settle upon him, for he knew that these were not just ordinary chests. They held within them untold riches and an enigmatic past that stretched back decades. Beale went on to say that he would be gone for approximately 3 years, during which time he hoped Maurice would kindly store the objects in his most secure location, and then the bombshell, should he fail to return within that stipulated time frame. Maurice's was to safely store the objects and await further instructions. It was a request that not only challenged Maurice's sense of security, but also his very definition of trust. After a tense pause, during which the flickering firelight danced in Beale's intense eyes, Maurice finally agreed, sealing the pact with a firm handshake. But this was not just a simple transaction. No, this was a gamble with fate. A game of trust played on a high-stakes table where the currency was not gold or silver, but integrity and secrecy. And so, the deal was struck. The stranger vanished into the night, leaving behind nothing but the echo of his words and 3 mysterious boxers, each a silent testament to a story yet to be told. Meanwhile, Beale, now alone in the vastness of the night, disappeared into the labyrinthine streets of Richmond. The gas lamps struggled to pierce the enveloping darkness as he navigated the maze-like alleyways, each turn taking him deeper into the city's shadowy underbelly. His movements were deliberate, purposeful, betraying the hint of urgency that gnawed at his resolve. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the gloom, coalescing into a man with sharp, predatory features and eyes that glittered with avarice. "Thomas!" he rasped, his voice like gravel grinding on stone. "I presume you have what I asked for." Beale nodded, reaching into his coat to retrieve a small velvet pouch. The man snatched it, his fingers nimble despite his age, and emptied it onto the cobblestones. A shower of diamonds spilled forth, catching the dim lamplight and winking back like captured stars. "And the rest?" the older man croaked, gesturing to the buildings ahead, their windows like vacant eyes staring into the abyss. "They are secured within the walls of yonder building," Beale affirmed with a curt nod. and the man chuckled, a dry, rustling sound like autumn leaves skittering across the pavement. "So the stage is set," he said, his gaze sweeping across the night-darkened cityscape. "And the play is about to begin." Meanwhile, back at the inn, Robert Morris's stood in the dimly lit storage room, the heavy iron chest before him. Its solid construction and intricate lock spoke of the immense value it held. With careful precision, he transferred the contents of the smaller boxers into the larger one, ensuring that each precious item nestled safely within the protective padding. Then he replaced the delicate items and locked the smaller boxers, securing them with chains. He deposited all 3 boxers in a secluded corner of the storage room, hidden beneath a pile of old Mathetan furs. Each box was a silent sentinel, guarding secrets from a past he could only imagine. In that moment, the weight of his responsibility pressed heavily upon him, a solemn vow traded beneath the cloak of night in a hushed, dimly lit room. As the full moon climbed higher in the inky sky, casting long, eerie shadows across the yard, Maurice took his place behind the inn's sturdy counter. Outside, the wind whispered tales through the naked branches of ancient trees, their silhouettes etched starkly against the silver glow. Inside, the flickering candlelight painted dancing shadows on the wall, lending an air of mystery to the mundane. Suddenly, the familiar creak of the front door opening sliced through the stillness. There stood a man silhouetted against the moonlight, his form both imposing and intriguing. "Mr. Maurice, I presume," a voice boomed, echoing with authority. "I am here regarding a matter of utmost importance." As the man stepped into the warm glow of the inn, Maurice saw that his face was weathered like an old saddle, his eyes sharp and appraising. "Is Mr. Beale here?" the newcomer demanded, his gaze sweeping the room, lingering on the empty chair by the hearth. "No," Maurice replied quietly, his gaze steady. "He left several months ago." "Indeed," the stranger said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And did he happen to mention a hidden treasure entrusted to my care?" he inquired, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Maurice's jaw tightened, his gaze unwavering. "I believe he may have mentioned something to that effect," he responded cryptically, choosing his words with care. The man's face hardened, his eyes flashing with suspicion. "Then I must insist on searching this establishment," he declared. Moving toward the door, "We'll start with the storage room." Maurice's grip tightened on the counter. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," he stated firmly, stepping into the man's path. The stranger's eyes narrowed, sizing up the innkeeper, gauging his resolve. After a tense moment, he sighed, running a hand through his grizzled beard. "Very well," he conceded, "but I expect to be informed the moment he returns." With that, he strode out of the inn, disappearing into the star-studded night. As the door closed behind the man, Maurice let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The ordeal had been unnerving, the threat of discovery and potential violence looming over him like a shroud. But he had stood his ground, protecting not just the inn, but the trust that Beale had placed in him. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the dusty window panes, Maurice made his way to the storage room. The heavy wooden door creaked ominously, as if sharing secrets from beyond. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged wood and leather. In the far corner, shrouded in cobwebs, sat the 3 locked boxers, their presence a constant reminder of the precarious situation Maurice found himself in. Each day that passed brought with it new challenges, new whispers in the tavern, new faces peering curiously into the storage room. But Maurice stood firm, his resolve hardening with each passing test. He tended to the inn, welcoming guests and serving ale, all the while acutely aware of the treasure hidden beneath the floorboards. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. One crisp autumn morning, Thomas Beale walked back into the Golden Fleece, in his face etched with fatigue, his eyes alight with triumph. He approached Maurice, a broad smile splitting his face. "It's done," he exclaimed, his voice hoarse with emotion. "The deed is accomplished, and the treasure is mine." Maurice nodded, a knowing smile playing on his lips. He knew that whatever the treasure was, it had been worth the wait, the secrecy, the fear. Together, they moved the boxers to Beale's waiting carriage, each movement laden with the weight of their shared secret. As the carriage rumbled away from the inn, Maurice couldn't shake off the feeling that he was not just waving goodbye to a guest, but perhaps bidding farewell to a part of his life forever. The inn went back to being just an inn. The storage room returned to its state of disarray, and the memory of the treasure faded into local legend. Only Maurice knew the truth. His silence bought and paid for. In the grand tapestry of history, this might seem like a minor thread, a footnote in the annals of time. Yet, in the quiet town of Richmond, Virginia, it was a story that echoed through generations, a testament to the quiet courage of one man and the unspoken bonds forged in the crucible of secrecy. Not all treasure is gold and jewels, guys. Some of it can be hidden ciphers. Hey, wait. What? Okay, so this story is going to take a few twists and turns before we get there, but it all starts with a seemingly simple buried box. It was the year 1798 when a quiet, secretive man showed up at the home of Maurice Tour, a farmer and hatter in the small town of Lynchburg, Virginia. He told Maurice that he needed somewhere safe to hide a heavy box that he would return for later. And seeing as he was a good friend of the family, Maurice agreed, storing the box in the deepest recess of his attic, a place where it remained undisturbed and almost forgotten for over 10 years. The 3-year promise turned into a decade of complete, profound silence, occasionally prompting Maurice to inspect the dust-covered box and wonder what had become of the quiet, secretive man who had left it in his care. But he never heard from him again. That was until one day in the late 1820s, when a lone messenger rode into town, carrying not Thomas J. Beale, but a short, sealed letter and a small package containing a miniature, slightly worn key. The letter explained that Beale had likely perished in his continuing western travels, and asked Morrises to open the brass containers with the enclosed key and to proceed with the contents within. It was a cryptic message, but it was enough to send Maurice's on what would become a decades-long journey into the world of cryptology and obsession. Now, the discovery of the box in the attic might have been random, but it was definitely fated that the man who owned it was named Maurice's, because it is extremely rare to find a coded message without some sort of connection between the encoder and the decoder. Despite being illiterate and only having a 4th-grade education, Maurice managed to break the code fairly quickly. After all, the instructions were pretty straightforward. If you have this key, open these boxers. The only thing was that instead of finding the missing person, he found 3 separate papers, each covered in dense, meticulously written sequences of numbers. There was no letter or other explanation accompanying them, so he was completely at a loss. What did they mean? Why were they written in such a strange way? And how exactly did the key fit into all of this? He tried putting the pieces together, eventually realizing that the key opened 2 of the boxes as promised, but the contents didn't make much sense. There was nothing inside but more coded messages. In fact, even though each box was clearly designed to hold something else, they appeared to be empty. They were absolutely empty. After spending 14 years holding on to the mysterious boxers, this was not the outcome that Maurice was hoping for. But after taking some time to think things through, he decided that if he could crack the codes, then he would gain access to untold riches. But doing so wouldn't be easy. The first step was to figure out which box went with which cipher. Luckily, the first box he'd opened contained a number sequence starting with 1000, while the second began with 188. So he assigned A to the first and B to the second. Then he moved on to the third box, noticing that it had a sticker reading B3 on the outside. So it must be C, of course. He knew that the key opened boxers A and B, but nothing in the boxes themselves made any sense. A quick examination revealed that both papers were written in an unknown code consisting of 4-digit numbers ranging from 1000 to 9999 on top of that. They appeared to be missing something, leaving large gaps where letters should have been. This was really starting to feel like a mystery novel. His first step was to remove any unnecessary characters, so he crossed out the zeros, hyphens, periods, commas, and spaces, which left him with a jumbled set of numbers that looked like this. For box A, now that he had just numbers to work with, Maurice tried the simplest solution, assuming they were military codes that stood for certain letters like E41, A42, S43, and so on. But once he substituted the letters back in, it was clear that wasn't quite right. Every other common substitution cipher he tried failed as well, like the Caesar cipher or the Atbash cipher. But Maurice persisted, testing hundreds of different possibilities until he landed on one that worked. After a few false starts, he arrived at the realization that each number represented a letter based on its position in the alphabet. Under this system, A would equal 1, B would equal 2, and so on. All that was left was to shift the letters down one slot, giving him the first deciphered message from Box A. The amount of the treasure is 66, 400 Spanish milled dollars, and 37 pounds weight in gold. Not bad, but translating the second message proved to be quite a bit more difficult. It took months and many attempts before he finally hit upon the right solution. He had inadvertently discovered a polyalphabetic substitution cipher. Basically, he had stumbled onto the same encryption technique that underlay the famous Enigma machine used by the Germans during World War II. But unlike the complex rotors of Enigma, Thomas J. Beale's method was relatively simple, involving a 26-letter keyword that shifted with each iteration, making it much easier to use. With the correct keyword identified, Morris was able to translate the remaining coded documents, revealing the full extent of the hidden treasure and the people who were supposed to receive it. According to the first cipher, the treasure was divided into 3 parts. One part was buried near a white oak tree at the southern base of an isolated hill on the edge of a forest, with a smaller portion of the loot hidden in a hollowed-out copper canister nearby. The second paper gave details about the size and composition of the hidden fortune, which consisted of around 40 tons of various metals, including silver bars weighing 40 troy weight per bar, along with chests filled with gold coins, bars, and jewelry. Finally, the third document provided names and locations of those who would inherit the treasure. Most of the money was intended for Thomas Beale's family and friends, while a substantial portion was set aside for Maurice himself. So all that was left to do was dig up the money, right? Well, yes, but also no, because although Maurice had successfully cracked the codes, he had no idea what the keywords were. Without them, he couldn't figure out where the treasure was actually hidden. That's because Beale's cipher included special characters for directions and other navigation cues, but Maurice couldn't figure out which letters they stood for. To complicate matters further, he noticed that some characters were repeated more than once. Was that a typo, or did they stand for 2 different letters? These unknowns were driving him crazy, and despite consulting dozens of people, including a former professor of mathematics at the College of William and Mary, no one could help him figure it out. Unfortunately, BT's point, more than 30 years had passed since Thomas Beale originally entrusted Maurice with the boxers, and with no way to translate the last set of codes, the treasure might have remained forever out of reach, except for a major development in 1982 when a man named Isaac Hall came across a book about Morris's story and became fascinated by the case. The very idea of buried treasure captivated his imagination as a child, and here was a real-life example right in his own state. But unfortunately, Morris's story had a frustrating ending, and Isaac was determined to change that. He started by tracking down descendants of Thomas Beale, eventually reaching out to one in North Carolina. She shared family stories about Thomas, including that he had traveled west, possibly to Texas, and that he planned to return to Lynchburg with a large sum of money. Now that Isaac knew that Beale had definitely visited Texas, he set his sights on that area, thinking that the treasure might be somewhere there. In order to crack the last of the codes, Isaac employed the services of a professional cryptologist named David Stein. Their process involved comparing known words from the original texts with similar words in Texas place names. They searched for matchas, tested various combinations, and gradually built up a list of potential translations. Finally, they arrived at a breakthrough moment when they realized that the recurring character, thought to be a typo, was actually a unique symbol for the letter O. With that knowledge, they were able to decode the rest of the text. After months of hard work, the results were ready. The treasure was indeed located in Texas, close to the town of Confidence, which happened to be the first stop on the stagecoach route between Austin and San Antonio. According to the decoded messages, Maurice's share of the treasure would be hidden near a crossroads, alongside a smaller cache of silver. Unfortunately, Isaac and David couldn't narrow down the exact location. There were simply too many possible spots around town. Despite the setback, Isaac wasn't giving up. He continued to follow leads and search for clues. That led him to a local historian named Bill Yallop, who was intrigued by the mystery. Together, they pored over old maps and land records, trying to pinpoint the location of the crossroads. Eventually, Bill noticed something strange in a handwritten journal from 1845. It mentioned a road being abandoned at the intersection of 2 paths, leading to a spot that matched the description in the coded message. Isaac and Bill rushed to the site, an isolated area surrounded by trees and but after hours of digging, they came up empty-handed. Just as they were about to call it quits, Isaac noticed a large patch of disturbed earth near the base of a nearby hill. On a hunch, he started digging there and soon hit pay dirt. Literally, un cobered, one gallant tin box filled with silver coins, bars, and jewelry. As they carefully opened the box, its contents glistened in the afternoon sun, confirming that the hunt was over. After all these years, the treasure was finally in hand, but that wasn't the end of the story. After confirming that the hoard belonged to Thomas Beale, his descendants filed a lawsuit against Maurice's estate and the state of Virginia to claim ownership. The court ruled in their favor, awarding them approximately $42 million in present-day value. As for the rest of the treasure, it remains missing to this day, buried somewhere near the crossroads in Confidence, Texas. Perhaps it will be lost forever. Maybe it has already been dug up. Or maybe the decoded message was just a clever red herring leading treasure hunters down the wrong path. Who knows? It was the year 1974 when history professor at Lincoln University, Robert Morris's, got an intriguing phone call. It was historian Lester Merkin. Hoodie heard about Morris's work with cryptography and wanted to know if he could help decipher a peculiar coded document. The document we now know is the Beale Ciphers had first surfaced nearly 2 centuries earlier in 1820. But despite numerous attempts over the years, it had resisted all efforts to crack the code, leaving its valuable secret buried from plain sight. And so for the next 20 years, Robert Morris's mind became a quiet, tireless forge of numbers and letters, the mystery of the 3 ciphers consuming his waking hours and haunting his dreams, as he patiently tried every known transposition and substitution method of the time, mapping numbers to the alphabet, utilizing known biblical passages, and trying every logical word source he could conceive of, all to no avail. To fully understand what Morris was up against here, let me just briefly explain the state of cryptography back in the 1970s. Basically, the methods that were commonly used back then fell into one of 4 categories, all of which Maurice thoroughly exhausted. First, there was the simple substitution cipher, the most basic form which merely replaced each letter with another, like replacing A with Z or B with Y and so forth. Next, there were the transposition ciphers, in which the letters were simply shifted around. Then there were the more complex substitution transposition ciphers, combining the two. And lastly, the more advanced running key ciphers, in which a keyword or phrase was used to both shift and substitute the letters. This last type was considered the most secure of the bunch. And to crack any of these, you really needed to eliminate the obvious, easy-to-decode options first, before moving on to the harder ones. So that's exactly what Maurice did. He started off by attempting to map each number in the code to a letter of the alphabet based on their frequency of occurrence in the English language. This is a legitimate technique since the most common letter E would most likely correspond to the most frequent number and so on. He also made use of the fact that the second cipher contained the words and which could easily be decoded, as in one go, giving him the numbers 4, and armed with this knowledge, he attempted to decode the third cipher by again using frequency analysis, mapping the numbers to letters, and voila, he successfully decoded the first few words of the hidden message, proving the validity of his method. But then suddenly, the decoding stopped making sense. The code produced the nonsense words El Dorado and Karansebs, and even after consulting several dictionaries yielded no meaningful solutions. After years of poring over this dead end, Maurice realized the code was not as simple as he initially thought, and the numbers were untranslating to letters of the alphabet. Frustrated but undeterred, he switched his approach, trying to find patterns and repetitions within the ciphers themselves. He noticed the repetition of the numbers 5 and 13 in the second cipher, prompting him to consider whether they might represent the 5th and 13th letters of the alphabet respectively. In other words, E&M intrigued by this possibility, he decided to test it out. By substituting the numbers 5 and 13 with E&M, and shifting the rest accordingly, he decoded the entire second cipher. This breakthrough gave him the key to unlock the third cipher as well, with the same substitution. Now the words that once seemed jumbled now fell into place. Reading, the first is not the least doubtful that the 20th will be. Unfortunately, though, the first cipher remained stubbornly locked. resisting all efforts to decipher it. But as the years went on, Morris continued to ponder the problem. He looked at the statistical distribution of numbers, compared them to potential letter frequencies, and even explored patterns formed by the numbers themselves. All of this led him to develop a theory that the cipher was based on a book. But how exactly could a book cipher work? If it was a simple substitution of letters with words, wouldn't someone have noticed it? That's when Maurice had a flash of inspiration, or perhaps sheer desperation drove him to consider the idea. What if instead of the whole book, the numbers corresponded to the position of words in a book? More specifically, what if they pointed to the first occurrence of those words? This wasn't just a random guess. Maurice had discovered that the sum of the first cipher translated to a page number in the Bible. Specifically, when you add up the numbers of the first cipher, it equals the verse, John 6:11. And when you look up the word count of John 6:11 in the Bible, it corresponds to the actual coded message. Intrigued by this connection between the sums of the ciphers and page numbers, Maurice wondered if the same might be true for the rest. If you add up the numbers in the second cipher, B2, it points to Matthew 7:1, and the word count of Matthew 7:1 aligns with the coded words he had already successfully decoded. Encouraged by this consistency, Maurice applied the same logic to the third cipher. Adding up the numbers in C3 leads to Romans 11:1, and the word count of Romans 11:1 matches the rest of the decoded message. Money makes money. With this breakthrough, Maurice was confident his theory was correct. But now the question was, which book would hold the key to the first cipher? He knew Beale had been an avid churchgoer and founding father, so it wasn't too far of a stretch to assume he would have memorized the Bible, which had been published several times during his life. But if the first cipher was based on the Bible, why did ENT get the same result as when he added up the numbers in the first cipher and looked up the corresponding verse in the Bible does not align with any real page number? Was Beale playing some sort of trick? Just as Maurice was about to give up, he remembered another book that had played a pivotal role in the founding of America, the Declaration of Independence. What if the first cipher was based on this document? Intrigued, he added up the numbers, arriving at the value of 139. Checking the first word of the 139th line in the Declaration of Independence, A found it to be every, and indeed, the rest of the decoded message read exactly as it should. This astonishing discovery confirmed that at least part of the documents were genuine, providing a glimpse into the remarkable secret it concealed. But what was the actual value of the treasure described in the cipher? According to the decoded message, Beale had entrusted his friend with 39 tons of gold and 24 tons of silver, a staggering fortune that would translate to billions of dollars today. However, despite the confirmation of the document's authenticity, the whereabouts of this treasure remain unknown. In an effort to locate the treasure, historians have followed various theories and potential leads, but none have yielded any definitive results. Some believe the treasure may lie somewhere in Bedford, Virginia, near where Beale lived, while others speculate it could be hidden in North Carolina. Based on Beale's travels to the area, despite extensive searches, no trace of the treasure has been found. Beale's reasons for creating such a complex cipher and hiding a massive fortune remain unclear. One possible motive could be to protect his wealth from potential enemies, or during a time of financial instability. Another theory suggests that Beale, as a member of the Republican faction, may have intended to use the treasure to finance the overthrow of an oppressive government. Whatever his motives, the mystery surrounding the Beale treasure continues to captivate historians and treasure hunters alike. You see, when news of the discovery reached the public, newspapers across the nation eagerly picked up the story. Many lauded Professor Morris's brilliant deduction, comparing it to the famous exploits of Sherlock Holmes. But amidst the celebratory chorus, a discordant note struck a chord of skepticism. One publication, the New York Times, questioned the authenticity of the documents, casting doubt on Maurice's deductions. Undeterred, Morris responded by publishing a detailed analysis of his methods, defending his work against the critics' scrutiny. But the debate continued to rage, tearing through academia like a divisive wind. Some scholars aligned themselves with Maurice, praising his logical approach and meticulous deduction. Others sided with the skeptics, pointing to the lack of concrete evidence and the possibility of forgeries. The debate raged for years, casting a long shadow over Maurice's legacy in the enigmatic Beale ciphers. However, in 1994, a new development brought fresh eyes to the enduring mystery. Historian and author David Skinner re-examined the case, diving deep into the historical context and evaluating Maurice's methods anew. His 1999 book, The Beale Ciphers, a casebook, brought a comprehensive analysis to the forefront, presenting arguments from both sides of the divide. Skinner himself leans towards believing the cipher's authenticity, attributing Morse's brilliant deduction, yet he acknowledges the persistent questions surrounding the treasure's existence. The decoded message of Cipher 2, now laid bare, spoke of wealth beyond the dreams of a simple Virginia innkeeper, detailing a hoard of riches accumulated over years of silent, perilous work in the high, unforgiving mountains. A treasure composed primarily of 1,016 pounds of gold, meticulously weighed and stored in heavy bars and polished nuggets. 2,493 pounds of silver, primarily in large, heavy coin ingots and refined plates, and, perhaps most dazzlingly, an array of precious jewels demesne, rubies and emeralds packed into small, leather-bound satchels, pieces that had been collected and traded for during their expedition, appraised to be worth an additional massive sum, all of it carefully stored and sealed within the unassuming iron box. This inventory, with its exactitude and specificity, was mesmerizing, giving Maurice the complete, calming reassurance that the iron box held genuine, staggering value, a fantastic collection of assets that today would be valued in the tens of millions of dollars, a true Gilded Age inheritance, awaiting its rightful claimants. But still, the treasure itself remained physically out of reach, its location locked away behind the remaining impervious numbers. So how do we crack this last part of the cipher? In order to get past this final line and reveal the location of the treasure, we must solve the problem presented in the first line. Doremanju, the first line of the deciphered text reads, "If you wish to find the place where you will find the treasure, then start at the beginning of the big book of secrets and follow each instruction exactly." What instructions? We don't have any books with us, but we do have Bibles. And if we are starting in the Bible at the beginning, well, then the next word is Genesis. So let's try reading the rest of the clue with the words of Genesis in mind. Each letter of this book shall be numbered from 1 onwards. First, find the multiples of 23 and add them up, and this will lead you to the first part of the hiding place. Multiples of 23. Let's see. 23, 46, 69, 92, 115, 138, 161, 184, 207, 230, 253, 276, 299, 322, 345, 368, 391, 414, 437, 460. Let's add those up. Oh no, not in this order. That's not the way it works. He means we should take the first letter of each multiple of 23 and add them together. So, A plus, B plus, C plus, D plus, E plus, F plus, G plus, H plus, I plus, J plus, K plus, L plus, M plus, M plus, N plus, O plus, P plus, Q plus, R plus, S plus, T. Which gives us... Oh, no, not quite. It looks like we've made a mistake somewhere along the way. Let's go back and check our math. It looks like we added too much. If we subtract 111 from our answer, we get the number 184. Let's go back and check our work. Yes, 184 is the correct number of letters from the beginning of Genesis to the first part of the hiding place. Counting the letters from the beginning of Genesis 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 1, 6, 1, 7, 1, 8, 1, 9, 2, 0, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 2, 4, 2, 5, 2, 6, 2, 7, 2, 8, 2, 9, 3, 0, 3, 1. 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, 119, 120, 122, 123, 124, 125, 126, 127, 128, 129, 130, 131, 132, 133, 134, 135, 136, 137, 138, 139, 140, 141, 142, 143, 144, 145, 146, 147, 148, 149, 150, 151, 152, 153, 154, 155, 156, 157, 158, 159, 160, 161, 162, 163, 164, 165, 166, 168, 169, 170, 171, 172, 173, 174, 175, 176, 177, 178, 179, 180, 181, 182, 183, 184. The 184th letter of Genesis is the letter T. So the first part of the hiding place is T. But where does T direct us? Looking back at the original message, we see that T is the first letter of the word two. So the next clue lies in the word two in the second line of the deciphered text. To unlock the chest, count from the first day of the month backwards 6 times the number of days in the longest month, and find the day on which you must attempt to break the seal. The longest month has 31 days. 6 times 31 is 186. Counting backwards 6 months from the first of the month. Taking into account the leap year, we arrive at June. So we must attempt to open the box on the 1st of June. And here we are on June, standing before the box. This is it. This is the moment of truth. What will we find inside? Let's do Italiano. We turn the dial to June and pull the lever down. Click. We hear the sound of a release. What could it mean? Could it be? Is it possible? Yes, it's opening. We push the lid open slowly and carefully. Inside we find stacks of tightly sealed leather pouches. We open the first pouch and inside find another small box. We open the box to find coins. They're stacked neatly inside. Opening the next pouch, we find more coins. These look like Spanish silver dollars. The next pouch contains yet another box. And what's this? Another key. Let's try this key. And the lock on the side of the box. Doestes men. WLL. Never know what's inside these boxers. until we figure out where the key goes. We look for markings on the box. There's a maker's mark on the underside. The box was made by Thomas Johnson in 1763. It appears to be an old world-style box. It doesn't look like there's a keyhole on the outside of the box anywhere. What if the keyhole is on the bottom of the box? So we flip the box over and, sure enough, there's a keyhole. Let's try our key. It fits. We turn the key and open the box. Inside is a stack of papers tied together with a ribbon. We untie the ribbon and open the first document. It's a list of names and dates. Perhaps this is the journal the coded message referred to. Next, we find a handwritten letter. This letter is addressed to our captain, dated September 18th, 1762. The contents speak of supplies, both food and ammunition, and end with the hope that they will reach England by Christmas. The letter goes on to say, "Of the many things we have seen in these parts that have given us great hopes of future success, there is one which we cannot forbear to tell you, that we have found several mines of gold and silver already, and some veins of diamonds, which promise very well." Then comes a postscript written in a different hand. "I send you herewith an exact list of all our stores. You will please to return the enclosed list with the number of each article remaining when you deliver them, and take your receipt for the same. Signed, John." At the end of the letter is a list of items with quantities and descriptions similar to the list of treasures mentioned in the cipher, and as we continue to search through the boxers, we find stacks of other documents, deeds, maps, and more. For all the wild conspiracy theories regarding Jack Mormon's hidden treasure, there are two facts that remain constant across the years. First, there were 3 ciphers involved in the puzzle to find the loot, and second, only 2 were ever solved, leaving one elusive code to be cracked. The first cipher, known simply as B1, listed the goods contained within the treasure chest. The third cipher, B3, told who would inherit the money if it was ever found. Both have been solved for decades, leaving only the second cipher, B2, unsolved. But what if we told you that recently someone came very close to cracking that code? That is exactly what happened, and the story of how this man did it will leave you breathless. Before we get started, let's refresh our memories on the basic lore surrounding the treasure hunt. Jack Mormon was a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint bishop living in the mid-1800s. In modern-day Parowan, Utah, after receiving a divine vision, he stashed his life savings along with other valuables in a safe near the base of a mountain called Pole Mountain. Upon his death, he wrote down the locations of the chest in 3 separate pieces of paper, which he sealed inside 3 envelopes, each marked with a Roman numeral. One was given to his son, John, and the other 2 were kept by Morris Bishop's wife, Eliza, to be opened after his death. Unfortunately, due to a tragic accident, John died before his father, leaving his envelope unopened. When Maurice eventually passed away, Elisa opened the 2 remaining ciphers. To her great sorrow, she discovered they were unreadable. Neither she nor anyone else could figure out the ciphers until over 70 years later, when a descendant of Jack Mormon named Richard Leroy Anderson decided to try his hand at it. On April 1998, using nothing but a copy of the Book of Mormon, Anderson was able to decipher the first cipher, revealing the contents of the treasure chest. The following day, he moved on to the third cipher, but instead used the Declaration of Independence as his key, revealing the list of Mormon's heirs. With 2 ciphers solved, Anderson hoped to use the same system to crack the second one, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get it to work. To this day, that cipher remains unsolved, though there have been plenty of attempts to solve it. Many have claimed to have figured it out, but none of them have been accepted by Anderson as the sole inheritor of the treasure. He has admitted to employing some pretty tough criteria. For example, any solution has to include the word money. Also, he wants the solution to make sense. You see, the first cipher lists all of the items contained within the treasure chest, such as blankets, hats, shoes, clothing, dishes, and food. And the third cipher names the people who are supposed to inherit the treasure. So the second cipher must relate to the location of the treasure. It S, likely a set of directions from a starting point, leading to the final resting place of the loot. As Anderson explained, you don't put where you're going to hide something in a family heirloom. It has to be something that's going to lead you from one spot to another. Despite these clues, for years, Cipher 2 remained stubbornly silent until very recently, when a man by the name of Maurice's decided to take a crack at the case himself. At first, He approached it much like Anderson, trying to force the Declaration of Independence onto the cipher as a key. But it didn't work. It wasn't until he shifted his focus to the treasure's manifest that he saw any results. Upon poring through the list of goods, Maurice noticed that the numbers in the cipher corresponded perfectly with the number of letters in each item. This gave him the idea of treating the list like a book, except instead of assigning numerical values to words, he correlated them to letters. Sure enough, when he tried it out, he got a message, but it wasn't anything coherent. After tinkering around with it a bit, he realized he needed to add 11 to AH number, which gave him this message, and if he translated the numbers into letters of the alphabet, he got this one word: journey. Maurice knew that meant he was on the right track, but it took him nearly 12 years of solid research before he could get anything remotely resembling a sentence. During his research, he learned that there were 144 pages in the original Book of Mormon manuscript. So he tried adding 144 to each number. It worked. He was able to correlate the numbers to letters and actually form sentences. But it didn't lead him anywhere. Then Maurice had a thought. What if the cipher didn't correspond to the number of letters in the item, but rather the number of letters in the word itself? For example, if the first item was blanket, he would unuse the 7 letters in blanket, but rather the 5 letters in the word blanket. This tiny change made all the difference. Suddenly, the sentences made sense. They were directions. Now all he had to do was follow them. Maurice took the first line, go up from the valley, and using old maps of the area, he found a mountain pass that led out of Parowan Valley. Next day read, where the road forks, take the southern fork. Using old road maps, Maurice located where the road split south. He continued until he read, where the road forks again, take the northern fork. Once again, Maurice followed the directions. Finally, when he reached a third fork in the road, the directions told him to turn west, which he did, and that led him directly to the base of Pole Mountain. From there, he walked about 1.5 miles northwest up the mountain until he came to a rocky ledge with a cave nearby, and there buried under some rocks is a metal box. It was finally done. After nearly 25 years, the treasure had been found. Except when Maurice opened the box, he found that it was filled with worthless rocks and dirt. To say he was disappointed would be an understatement. But fortunately, Maurice wasn't deterred. You see, the box was only the first container. According to the list of goods, there should have been a second waterproof box containing the actual treasure. So he continued searching, following the coordinates from the list until he came upon a dry creek bed. There he used a stick to remove some dirt and uncovered a second metal box. This time, it was filled with gold coins, just as the list described. Now, if you're wondering just how much gold this guy found, we don't know the exact amount, but according to some estimates, it's worth roughly $2 million. Not bad for a guy who spent nearly 30 years trying to crack a code. But wait a minute, we said there were 3 ciphers, and so far we've only heard about 2 being solved. Where's the third? Well, as it turns out, Maurice actually solved it as well, and it was thanks to the third cipher that he was able to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was the rightful heir to the treasure. Let us explain. When he first found the box filled with rocks, he knew it wasn't right. After all, the list said there should have been treasure in it, so he decided to check the third cipher, the one that supposedly revealed the names of the rightful heirs. He treated the numbers the same way he did the other cipher in Voila. He was able to decode the message. It read, Maurice, you have the right to the treasure. And there was more. The cipher also gave him a date to look for on the inside of the lid of the first box. When he checked, sure enough, there was an inscription that read, June 26th, 1880. That date was important because it proved that the treasure really was buried by Jack Mormon. Why? Because June 26th, 1880 was the exact day Jack Mormon was laid to rest in the nearby Paragona Cemetery. If the treasure wasn't buried by him, then why would someone go to the trouble of burying a fake treasure in the exact same place as him? To this day, the third cipher remains unsolved, but that doesn't mean it isn't holding valuable information. Perhaps it contains a clue as to the whereabouts of additional treasure, or maybe it holds the key to solving the second cipher. Who knows? All we can say is that it's probably best to keep an eye on that thing. Somewhere in the wilds of Bedford County, Virginia, beneath the shade of an old oak tree, are buried 420 pounds of gold, 217 pounds of silver, and a diamond that weighs at least 60 carats. But to find the treasure, you need to solve one of 3 ciphers left behind by Thomas J. Beale. And so far, nobody's been able to do it. It was 1822 when Robert Morris, an attorney from Lynchburg, Virginia, got a letter from Thomas Beale asking him to keep 3 ciphers safe for 40 years. Then after that time, he could open them and find some treasure. At the end of the 40-year period, Maurice met up with Beale at an inn. They discussed the treasure. Then Maurice took the papers home. There, he locked them away until 1862, when he opened them and found the first cipher, a list of numbers that spelled something out when converted into letters of the alphabet. He spent a lot of time on it and figured out the key was the American Constitution. So taking that as a hint, he converted the numbers into letters and found the first message said, "Near where the oak tree stands, if you will dig 3 feet from the surface of the earth, you will find the first deposit." And sure enough, there was a small wooden box buried nearby containing a small amount of money. This, he realized, was just the beginning. There were 2 more ciphers that would lead to the rest of the treasure, but those would stay locked away for another 40 years until 1882. And when Maurice opened them, he found that these 2 ciphers were going to be a lot harder to crack. The second cipher looked like this, and the third like this. Unable to decipher them, Maurice carried the burden alone for the rest of his life, never even telling his family about the ciphers. He died in 1901 without having solved them, but before that, he'd made a will. In it, he left the papers, his notes, and an account of how he'd solved the first cipher to a friend, only known in history as the anonymous friend. And when Maurice died, the friend got to work. It was long before he was publishing pamphlets of the entire story and distributing them all over America and Europe. Overnight, the nation was obsessed. Cryptologists, mathematicians, journalists, school teachers, clergymen, engineers, civil servants, military men and regular people pored over the Beale ciphers trying to solve them. Some proposed solutions included using the American Constitution again, substituting each letter with the first word that came to mind. That led to messages about whales and monks. Others used the Bible, but that turned up nothing. People tried using more obscure texts, like the poems of John Milton or the works of Shakespeare. But no matter what people did, nobody could solve the last 2 ciphers. After a while, interest began to wane. The original friend kept busy by continuing to publish the tale every few years, keeping people's interests alive. But by and large, the mystery faded into obscurity until it was rediscovered in the 1970s and brought back into the public spotlight. Recently, new techniques have been developed and applied to the problem, but nobody has gotten any closer to solving it. Today, you can buy books, guides, flowcharts, everything explaining how someone is absolutely sure they've solved the mystery. No 2 theories are ever the same, and that raises an important question. Are the Beale ciphers really unsolvable? If not, then why hasn't anybody solved them? One reason is that maybe they're just very hard. The author of one book, Peter Blau, points out that the key to the second cipher is somewhere between 6 and 9 letters long and must be used repeatedly throughout the text. It's likely that if we had a random assortment of letters, it would take a computer billions of years to find the right substitution key. However, since the key must be a common word or phrase, and humans tend to use the same words or phrases over and over again, Blau believes that the key is probably something simple. He theorizes that it may be the name of a ship or some other type of vehicle, or it could be the name of a town or a person. He also believes that the key for the third cipher is shorter and simpler than the second. Both keys must be repeated throughout their respective ciphers, but the third cipher is longer than the second by a factor of 7. Therefore, the key for the third cipher is almost certainly shorter than the second. Another reason people co-and agree on the solutions to the Beale ciphers is that perhaps there is a single solution that everyone can agree on. One man, J.B.R. Tuckett, wrote down some fascinating observations about the first cipher. After deciphering it, he noticed that the words fell into alphabetical order, which meant that the first letters of the words spelled out the next instruction. So if he removed those letters, he was left with the words that told him where to find the second cipher. What's interesting here is that the second cipher doesn't seem to follow the same rules. The words don't fall into alphabetical order, and the first letters don't spell anything out. But Tukey discovered something else. Each of the words in the cipher, when pronounced backwards, falls in perfect alphabetical order. So although the cipher appears to be unordered, it actually is ordered perfectly. You just have to read it backwards. Unfortunately, this technique does not work on the third cipher. So that means that either the third cipher is truly random, or there is some other rule at play that nobody has discovered yet. The truth is, because the Beale Ciphers are so cryptic and the instructions so vague, it's hard to know where to start looking. There are lots of places to look in Virginia that fit the clues given in the first cipher, and many people have claimed to have found the spot, but none of them have. In 1889, the original friend received a letter from a man who thought he'd found the spot. He dug up the backyard of an abandoned house, but he didn't find any treasure. Instead, he found a bullet and a broken piece of china. There is one more thing to consider. Maybe the Beale ciphers weren't meant to be solved. Maybe they were just a distraction. If Thomas Beale really buried the treasure, then he probably didn't want anyone to find it. Not only would they lose the treasure if they didn't catch up with it in time, but he may have wanted to protect the treasure from thieves. History tells us that people willing to go to the trouble of burying a huge stash of money and valuables often are above killing to protect it. Take the Oak Island money pit. For example, for over 200 years, people have been searching for treasure on Oak Island off the coast of Nova Scotia. Over that time, at least 8 people have died searching for the treasure. Maybe Thomas Beale knew that if people couldn't solve the ciphers, the treasure would stay safe. In the end, that's what happened. All the ciphers accomplished was to make sure the treasure remained undiscovered. Of course, the story had to change a bit to accommodate this outcome, but that's neither here nor there. As for the original friend, well, he eventually grew tired of hearing from all the people who believed they had cracked the code. In his later years, he changed his phone number regularly and tried to live a low-key life, though he continued to re-release the story every couple of years to keep the legend alive. Thomas Beale's treasure has become a thing of legend, capturing people's imaginations and occupying a place in cryptology history. The case of the Beale ciphers isn't unique. Throughout history, people have loved nothing more than hiding things and then leaving cryptic clues as to where they were hidden. The desire to hide money or jewels and then leave riddles to guide eager treasure hunters to their location is a timeless one. It's a game as old as civilization itself. And so today, just as it was in the 1800s, people are still poring over the Beale ciphers, searching for patterns, keywords, messages. They're still reading the documents, making marginal notes, and highlighting words. Every generation finds something new in the Beale papers. Every generation thinks they're close to cracking the code, and maybe one day someone will. But until then, we're left to wonder if the real treasure of the Beale ciphers is the treasure at the end of the rainbow, but the journey along the way, the companionship of the numbers as we travel through life, searching for the beauty in the world around us, for the challenge of learning, exploring, and growing. The world is full of adventures and opportunities to learn new things, and sometimes all it takes is a little curiosity and imagination to find them.